All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's Renaud back again with another video. This time we're going to talk about something that a lot of people these days are really struggling with, their weight. And when I say these days, I do truly mean nowadays. According to the World Health Organization, obesity has tripled worldwide from 1975 to 2016, at which point about 13% of the world's population were obese. From 2017 to 2018, the prevalence of obesity in the U.S. was 42.4%, according to the CDC. They also point out that the medical cost of obesity was $147 billion back in 2008. And that's just one estimate. Another actually put it at $190 billion as far back as 2005. Right now, in 2021, as demographic trends are unlikely to have done some kind of weird 180 in the last couple of years, that's likely even worse now. The health impacts of obesity that contribute to this gargantuan cost are myriad and severe, including, but not limited to, breast cancer, prostate cancer, endometrial cancer, ovarian cancer, esophageal cancer, renal cancer, pancreatic cancer, obviously, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, heart failure, arthritis, stroke, and more. Obesity itself is a very complex issue, and today we're not really here to analyze in depth the whys and the hows. To do that, we'd have to talk about some uncomfortable things like food insecurity in the world's richest country and racial disparities in obesity rates. We might do that at some point, but the title of this video is Weight Loss and Weight Gain. And today we're going to try and offer some foundational knowledge about how one's weight changes and what one could do to take control of their own weight. This is by no means going to be a detailed breakdown of obesity physiology and medical management, the likes of which a bariatrics doctor is used to, but rather an overview oriented towards the average individual that is both understandable and reasonably expansive. Now, before we jump into part one, I just want to put a disclaimer right up front. I am a doctor, but I'm probably not your doctor, unless I am, in which case, hit me up and we'll talk. But always consult with your doctor before making important health and medical decisions. I try to keep things broad in these videos to elaborate on concepts, but there may be some nuances to your particular situation that may not be accessible, that you may not pick up on exactly just by watching this video. This isn't medical advice, just a video for educational purposes. Now, at some point you've probably heard about the idea of calories in and calories out. Calories in refers to how much energy you consume through your diet. Calories out refers to how much energy you expend through activity and activity at rest and through heat. And together, these factors in and out determine your energy balance. This concept of energy balance is at the same time simple and wildly complex. Let's take a moment to define and really go into depth on what we mean by calories in and calories out. Calories in is a bit simpler than calories out. When you eat food, after chewing and swallowing, your body digests and then absorbs that food, and ultimately a variable amount of it gets to a point where it can be metabolized for energy. There are some commonly used numbers for how much each gram of micronutrient gives you as far as energy. So 4 calories for carbohydrates, 4 for protein, 9 for fats, and for you regular drinkers out there, 7 for alcohol, although that's not technically a normal macronutrient. These numbers are population averages, and individual mileage is going to vary. These numbers can even be different with the same food meal to meal, depending on how well you chew something like nuts, for instance, that often have indigestible cell walls that require thorough chewing so that your gut can extract as much energy as possible. On top of this, our metabolisms are variably efficient at turning food into energy, which can change based on a variety of genetic, endocrine, immune, and environmental factors. If you have celiac disease and you aren't gluten-free, your absorption is going to be limited and the calories on the box are going to be higher than what you're actually getting in a lot of cases. If all your brush border enzymes are working perfectly and your pancreas and gut are all in order, you may get a more optimal absorption profile than some other people. as a lot of people have undiagnosed gut issues that are simply mild enough that they can ignore them. Calories out is a more complicated matter. When we say calories out, we can break up energy expenditure into a few things: basal metabolic rate, the thermic effect of food, exercise energy expenditure, and non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Most of this, often something like 2/3 of calories out, is basal metabolic rate, or BMR. BMR can be affected by a variety of factors: current dry weight and muscle mass, in other words, you'll expend more energy as you get heavier; age, BMR tends to go down as you age; gender, men tend to have a higher BMR; and endocrine profile. For example, thyroid function has a large effect on BMR. Most of your basal metabolic rate actually comes from highly metabolically active organs like liver, brain, and heart, with muscles contributing more per pound than fat. On top of the known contributing factors, something like about 250 calories of BMR is unaccounted for in some individuals, which will become relevant when we talk about calculating calories and to put this information to use later in the video. The thermic effect of food has to do with how much energy it takes to do the work of using food as energy. Remember, digestion and absorption is an actively performed sequence. What exactly does that mean? It ends up meaning that protein requires more energy expenditure to digest and absorb than carbohydrates, and carbohydrates require more energy than fats. A diet that's majority fats produces the least thermic effect, and a majority protein diet has the most thermic effect. Exercise energy expenditure is pretty self-explanatory. It's how many calories you end up burning through directed exercise. This doesn't typically add up to a whole lot, even in people who work out pretty hard. The Beachbody Insanity products advertise up to 1,000 calories in a single workout. This is rarely, if ever, going to be the reality even with those programs. Don't get me wrong, I've done those workouts and they're hard. But burning that many calories through even hard exercise like that repeatedly is unlikely as your body adapts to the exercise. You might get that once in the very beginning if you're lucky, once or twice maybe. But even crazy programs like that might get you, in the higher, maybe 600-700 calories more realistically in terms of exercise energy expenditure, and maybe even less once you've gotten used to them. Most people who lift weights at the gym or go to spin class might be burning more like a few hundred calories that way, maybe 400 or 500 calories, provided they're not just going through the motions. Exercise is important for health, but tends to be a more minor contributor to overall calories out. Another contributor here is NEAT, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis. This is a really interesting component of calories out. Basically, everything that isn't exercise, eating, or sleeping, like for instance fidgeting, walking, standing, doing yard work, is counted as NEAT. Have you noticed that sometimes when you're sitting around, you subconsciously bounce your foot up and down without even thinking about it? Or maybe you tap your fingers on the table. Maybe you tend to pace at times, perhaps while you're making a call. I, for one, do all of these compulsively. I wouldn't feel right taking a call and not walking around. I'm always fidgeting around when I'm in a chair. A lot of these are either subconscious or otherwise a part of everyday life, like how much you end up walking throughout the day. As you can imagine, people with jobs that involve physical labor have much higher NEATs than those with desk jobs. Another very interesting observation is that NEAT is automatically regulated by a mechanism we don't really understand at this point, alongside a person's weight. If a person significantly gains weight, their NEAT tends to go down, and vice versa when that same person loses weight. Part of the adaptation that happens to weight change is an automatic subconscious regulation of NEAT. And this can actually go all the way up to 2,000 calories, the equivalent of some smaller people's total BMR. If, in a perfect world, your calories in were equal to your calories out, you'd end up not gaining or losing any weight during that period when they were equal. Now, this is pretty much never going to happen exactly, but you'd be surprised at how effective the homeostasis mechanisms of a normal person whose weight typically remains stable actually are. In a medical school nutrition lecture, I remember being told that most people who slowly become overweight in the absence of acute stressors, people often gain something like the weight of a cornflake every day. If your calories in ends up being greater than your calories out, you gain weight. If your calories out is greater than your calories in, you lose weight. Now that we've established that basic idea, we can move on to as you've gathered by now, if you want to lose weight, you're going to want to have more calories out than in. And if you want to gain weight, for instance, if you've started working out and you'd like to put on some mass, you'll be aiming for the opposite. You might be wondering, is it that simple? What about those foods in magazines and on TV that are supposed to help you blast fat? Well, as you may have guessed, most of that is nonsense, but there's some ways diet composition can affect your calorie intake. Some foods are more satiating than others, and that can definitely be a factor. Avocados, for instance, have a lot of fiber and form a lot of bulk in your gut. Therefore, they tend to make you feel more full faster, especially if you take them in with adequate water to avoid constipation from that large bolus of fiber. Large quantities of meat can also be very satiating and can suppress appetite, especially when consumed in, for instance, the context of a ketogenic diet, which we can discuss another time. Coffee can suppress appetite, as can smoking, although I'd never recommend using smoking as a method of weight loss. Eating calories is more satiating than drinking calories. In other words, a piece of fruit or some jerky is typically a better choice of snack than a protein shake in most weight loss contexts. Another way of dealing with one's appetite is to make sure you always stay well hydrated when trying to lose weight. This is of great importance as it's surprisingly easy to mistake thirst for hunger. Not only that, but drinking lots of water can give a little bit of a stretch to your stomach and suggest to your brain that maybe you really don't need to eat so much. You could even time some hydration pre-meal to lean into this concept. Now, aside from these basic diet composition elements, there's some more psychological and lifestyle-related measures that you can take. Of these, the ones I'd like to emphasize first are sleep duration/quality and stress levels. So, sleep is huge for health and it's big for hunger in society. Not sleeping enough, especially less than, say, 6 hours a night, is associated with an elevated risk of obesity. This is likely widely multifactorial, meaning there's a bunch of reasons why this is, but one avenue you may hear about is hormonal. Leptin, a primary satiety hormone, is affected by sleep. Sometimes it goes down and other times it goes up, suggesting the development of leptin resistance. The opposing major hunger hormone, ghrelin, has also been shown to go up with sleep deprivation. It's not a consistent finding, but it makes sense. Just know that not everyone will experience this the exact same. So if sleep is important, how can we improve quality and duration? Well, we should start with what's called sleep hygiene. A lot of this is going to seem very self-explanatory, but I'll also tell you that it's a very common thing I have to counsel my patients on when they come in complaining of sleep issues. Try to have a consistent sleep schedule. Exercise, but not within an hour of sleep. Same thing with eating and drinking close to sleep. One thing a lot of people have issues with is screen time before bed. The blue light spectrum emitted from a lot of these has been shown to be especially potent at suppressing melatonin release. Consider pre-bedtime meditation to help you wind down and reduce stress. If you have issues with early morning awakenings, you may have to take an honest look at your moods and see if maybe you might be depressed, as that's also a somewhat textbook association. If you're having morning headaches, daytime sleepiness, despite seemingly adequate sleep duration, or you've been observed snoring or choking or gasping in your sleep, especially if you're obese, you may want to talk to your doctor about an obstructive sleep apnea evaluation. If you're an older man that's waking up multiple times a night to urinate, and that's keeping you from sleeping well, that could be BPH, a prostate issue, that becomes increasingly common as men age. And you should maybe talk to your doctor about that as well. Condition yourself to think of and treat your bed as a sleep-specific environment. In other words, don't stay in bed if you're not tired. If you wake up and can't get back to sleep, or otherwise just have trouble sleeping, do some low-energy passive activity like reading or meditating until you're ready to fall asleep. Then get back in your bed. Next, we move on to stress levels. Now, stress is a fairly vague term. Are we talking about oxidative stress, perhaps like what's associated with obesity, or are we talking more like psychosocial stress? Yes. Obesity itself is associated with a constant low-grade systemic inflammation that messes up your metabolism. But before you ever get to that point, things like micronutrient deficiencies in the diet and the gradual march of accumulating abdominal white fat contributes to oxidative stress that can predispose you towards more obesity over time. A varied diet can help with the micronutrients, linked to chronometer in the description to help you evaluate your diet, and a caloric deficit alongside a consistent exercise regimen can help you reduce that abdominal fat. Psychosocial stress also plays a role. A Danish study found that low socioeconomic status was a strong predictor of obesity later in life, but that higher personal educational level attenuated this effect later on in life, by age 28 or so is what they found. Lower physical activity, higher computer time, family disharmony, and maladaptive coping mechanisms were thought to be contributors here. Some of this might also be mediated by stressors, making it harder to get adequate sleep, quality/duration. Chronic stress by multiple mechanisms may lead to higher cortisol levels, your body's endogenous corticosteroid, which can cause you to get fatter or stay fat over time. What can you do about stress levels? Honestly, some of these factors may be difficult to modify. If you're not making enough money, you're going to have to do wildly different things than if you're going through a divorce that's taken 4 years and is still ongoing. Most of the time, solutions in the realm of stress will be specific to your circumstances, but we can attempt to suggest some generalizable advice. For one, meditation is a good idea for keeping yourself centered and calming your mind. Practicing good sleep hygiene, as mentioned above, will help. Fostering a solid social support system in the form of strong relationships with friends and family will also be helpful in many situations. Let's move on to some other types of psychological tactics you can use here. Using bigger forks has actually been shown to influence your brain into thinking you're actually eating more and letting you feel full sooner. Using smaller plates can actually have a similar effect, although beware, as using bigger spoons actually has the opposite effect, so don't necessarily do that. You can also apply the idea of conditioning to food the same way we did with sleep earlier. If possible, designate your dinner table as the dedicated eating space. If you find yourself there for another reason, you may end up finding yourself hungry even though you recently ate. Accustoming yourself to eating in certain situations can help you both predict and avoid these situations. Another thing to consider is that some of you may be on medications that predispose you to weight gain or make weight loss more difficult. These include chronic corticosteroid use, like, for instance, prednisone, antidepressants, antipsychotics, some anti-seizure medications, insulin, some antihypertensives, over-the-counters you might be using like proton pump inhibitors and antihistamines, and more. Talk to your doctor about what you may or may not be able to do about these. Further, you might have underlying health problems that are making it harder to lose weight. These can include thyroid dysfunction, PCOS, menopause, post-pregnancy issues, Cushing syndrome, alcohol dependence, more rare things like acromegaly, and more serious things like heart failure, kidney failure, liver failure. And in those cases, you may be holding on to a lot of fluid, and frankly, you probably have bigger problems. Once again, talk to your doctor if you suspect any of these might be an issue. With all that less important stuff out of the way, let's get to the straight meat and potatoes of the matter: caloric deficit. Eating in a caloric deficit is key to losing weight if that is your goal. A nutrition professor from Kansas State actually went on a Twinkie diet and lost 27 pounds to demonstrate this point, that it's how much you eat as opposed to what you eat that's the biggest determinant of weight loss and gain. Is that a healthy way to do it? No. Is that how any medical profession would recommend you do it, including me? Of course not. But could you? Technically yes, but please don't. How do we determine what our caloric needs are so we can eat less than that? There's a few different calorie calculators available, and they're a good starting point. Calculator.net has a calorie calculator that not only tells you your caloric needs based on weight, age, height, and exercise frequency, it also tells you exactly what kind of deficit will yield what rate of weight loss. The rule of thumb for short to medium-term weight loss that you can use is that for every 3,500 to 3,600 calories of deficit you create, you lose about 1 pound of weight. And that's where the calculator is getting its estimates of what the rate of weight loss would be. That works out to about a 500 calorie deficit per day to induce about a pound of weight loss each week. And this is a pretty reasonable rate of weight loss to aim for. Too much more and most people get too hungry to stick with it. Too much less and you might get frustrated with the time it's taking, especially since any underestimates of your intake on any given day might destroy the deficit you thought you had. It's important to note that your calorie requirement will fluctuate over time. As you progressively lose weight, the weight input on that calculator will obviously go down and your requirement will go down, meaning that your weight loss will slow. You'll need a progressively lower caloric intake to maintain the same deficit, or otherwise you'll have to increase your activity in step with that weight loss. If you'd like an app that factors this in for you, you can use the NIH's Body Weight Planner, which accounts for dynamic changes in metabolism as you lose weight. And it allows you to set a goal weight with a date you want to reach that by, which you absolutely should do, referring to, goal weight and setting a date as well, so that you're clear on where you're starting and where you want to go. Remember, your body will adapt as your weight changes because it's always striving for homeostasis. It's not generally a fan of change, even if you think, change is good. Okay, so now you've figured out how many calories you need. You figured out your goal weight, and you're ready to go. So, how do you get where you're going? Well, it comes to mind that you should probably be able to keep track of how much you're actually eating. On a basic level, the answer here is calorie counting. Now, before you groan and flick off the video because that's not your speed, stick with me for a moment because we can make this manageable and more palatable, so to speak. One simple way of getting a jump start on calorie counting is with a program like Weight Watchers. What is their point system but a way of counting calories using single-digit numbers, and their delivered meal plans but a way of making you stick to your allotted calorie count? Seriously, that's all they're doing. They're just helping you count calories using smaller numbers for simple addition, and they're a billion-dollar company. Freaking brilliant business idea. That is, if you're willing or prefer to pay for that kind of structure. But you can really just do this yourself with even more precision at home. I'd suggest using an app like MyFitnessPal or Chronometer to keep track of your calories. And when I say keep track, I mean diligently. Anything that has calories that you eat or drink needs to go in there. Sodas have calories, they go in. Juices have calories, they go in. If the sauces on your dinner have calories, they go in. If you use a certain amount of oil to fry your food, that should also factor in. The full amount doesn't necessarily make it into the meal, but the calories add up, and you may benefit from simply adding in the full amount as a hedge against slip-ups elsewhere. Now, remember back in part 1 where we discussed components of calories out, and we talked about things like NEAT and how unexplained factors make a sizable difference in our BMRs? These calculators are really just a starting point. If it gives you a number and you find yourself gaining weight despite being pretty sure you're hitting that number, you're either forgetting to count some calories somewhere, or that calculator has underestimated your BMR because it's going by averages. I'm fortunate enough that these calculators typically get my BMR very close to accurate, but others may not be. You may have to troubleshoot more than I did. Now, if you're already well into the realm of obesity, I don't necessarily think going straight into calorie counting is going to be right for you. I've had enough experiences with patients where I laid all of this out for them and they didn't, or couldn't act on the information. Very possibly because I put too much on them at once. Oftentimes, people who are more obese will subconsciously under-record their intake, and many people, obese or not, will struggle to keep up with the requirements of this kind of strict calorie counting. Some might be intimidated by the numbers and implied math. It's often useful to ease yourself into the idea of being mindful of your diet before really diving into the part where you actively take control. It's a process. So the first thing I always tell people is to start by just making a habit of writing down whatever goes into your mouth that has calories, solid or liquid. Take a few weeks, hell, even a few months, getting it very drilled into your head that whatever you eat will be recorded somewhere, whether that be in an actual physical notebook or in your notes app on your phone. In other words, you start keeping an accurate food journal. At first, I tell people that until they get this habit thoroughly developed and they aren't leaving anything out of the food journal, don't even bother actively changing your diet. Just write down what you're already eating and be as honest as possible. Taking away the pressure of perceived calories can allow you to get a more honest accounting of your caloric intake, but get consistent with it. If you go out to eat, go ahead and do it. Just make it a rule that your journal goes with you, and if it goes in your mouth, it goes in the journal. What you record can be as simple as just a list of foods eaten, how much, and when you eat. And if you're really ambitious and committed, you can even include details like where you're eating, how you feel as you're eating, and what else you're doing while you're eating, like watching TV or something like that. Studies have shown that by simply doing this, food journaling and becoming aware of what you're eating at all times can lead to weight loss even without a more detailed weight loss plan. Once you're an honest, consistent tracker of what you eat, you can really get into taking control. That food journal, by keeping track of what and how much you eat, will allow you to accurately input your calories into something like MyFitnessPal or Chronometer. There's a lot of options to choose from. Chronometer is nice for tracking micronutrients. And from there, you'll be able to see what changes you need to make to hit your calorie goal. If for whatever reason you can't find an app you like, or the apps tend to be too complex for you, you can always revert to old school pen and paper with a calculator. You can literally just look up calorie info either online or on the nutrition facts on containers of what you're eating, and then manually add them up to yield your caloric intake. As far as what to eat as you reach your goal, that can be determined by your health goals and what you prefer. Honestly, you could just keep eating whatever you're eating now and systematically cut off certain servings over time, starting with simple carbohydrates and junk calories like alcoholic beverages. I've met some patients that were able to make visible weight changes just by quitting alcohol. Often, when I see someone who's obese and drinks often, I'll calculate how many calories that adds right in front of them in the office, because those calories should always go first from a health perspective. Simple carbohydrates like those in candies or juices aren't going to satiate you for very long. When they're metabolized and your blood sugar crashes later, it can drive you to eat more later and overall increase your calories in. So I'd cut them out first as well. Things like cola and juice are high-reward, low-hanging fruit, as you never really need them in your diet and they're often calorie-dense. You don't need to hit your daily deficit goal immediately. You could practice getting to a 200-calorie daily deficit for a few weeks before ramping up the deficit to maybe 300 and then later to 400 and 500. It's up to you how you get there, but the deficit is key. A certain amount of hunger will be expected, especially as you maintain a deficit over longer periods. Part of why I almost never recommend going too much over 500 per day is that hunger tends to become a bigger factor as you go over. How does exercise fit into all this? It helps. It's not how you get there, because you can't and shouldn't try to outwork a bad diet model, but it helps. Those extra however many 100 calories you burn working out gives you a bit of a cushion to your deficit in case there's a small slip up once in a while. And exercise has a variety of health benefits on top of that. This isn't the video where I'll go in depth on exercise, but rest assured that one is coming up. One way of helping weight loss along if you start to hit a plateau and you've already restricted your calories adequately or pretty heavily even, and you'd rather not keep cutting food, is to simply work out more. So what do you do when you reach your target weight goal? Well, I wouldn't stop tracking your calories just yet. It often takes months for your body to get used to the idea of being at a certain weight. I'd be good about tracking your diet for at least 6 months after you reach your goal. Seriously, that long. Just because you got to a certain weight and you like the way you look there, doesn't mean your physiology agrees with you just yet. Especially if you started out obese, BMI 30 plus, you probably got there over a prolonged time period and your body is more used to being heavy than it is to being smaller. Your homeostatic set point isn't going to change even after a few months of dieting. Find a target weight and then spend a few months making it your stable weight. Eventually, you'll be more capable of maintaining that weight even without a more intense diet tracking kind of routine. But I'd give it 6 months before you go back to not tracking at all if that's what you want to do. If you ever go back to not tracking at all. I can tell you from personal experience that it can come to be enjoyable, and the feeling of control can make you feel good. These days, I know the nutrition facts of everything I eat and can do the addition in my head as I go. I don't use MyFitnessPal anymore, but I'm never really not tracking anymore. Sometimes if I change something significantly, I'll use Chronometer to get an idea of my micronutrient balance, but most of the time I'm just cruising. Eventually, you'll get familiar enough with your own body and your response to diet and exercise that you'll be able to pick a target weight and take yourself there in a set amount of time, basically at will. Trust me, guys, if you're someone who's struggled with being overweight for a long time, that kind of confidence will feel good, and it's worth achieving. Now, the title of this video is Weight Loss and Weight Gain. So far, we've mainly focused on weight loss, and that's because that's just much more common issue. Weight gain is largely a matter of doing similar things, but with the goal of keeping a caloric surplus while working out. I personally gained most of my experience with dieting because I started working out and wanted to gain weight. Later, I got experience with weight loss as I was cutting. I've always had more of a problem gaining weight than anything. I find that if I stop tracking, my weight falls off precipitously. I know some people would love to have that problem, but trust me, it's not a good thing if you're trying to gain muscle. Honestly, the best advice I have for those in my same boat who want to gain weight is that meal frequency is your friend. I used to sit perpetually at like 145 to 155, and recently I've been able to make my body sit comfortably at around 170. The thing that made the biggest impact for me personally was snacking. Just find a healthy snack that you can have next to you as often as possible that you can just take in calories on easy mode. I remember back in college when I used to smoke cigarettes, I asked a friend how on earth it was possible for someone to smoke an entire pack of cigarettes in one day. I mean, that's 20 cigarettes. If each one takes maybe 10 minutes or so, that's over 3 hours a day of just smoking. And of course, the obvious answer I was given was that people are just chain smoking, just sitting there smoking back to back on easy mode. If you can make eating look less like a discrete meal or two a day and more like a constant low-level stream of calories interspersed with higher calorie spikes at meal times, you'll be able to gain more weight. Alternatively, you could just do that classic bro split of, 6 meals a day, 2 hours apart, that whole thing. I tried that and it just doesn't really work as well for me. And that's it, guys. A reasonably thorough introduction to weight loss and weight gain for the lay person with no BS, no cap, no useless nonsense. These are the basic principles that you can use in your everyday life to see changes in your weight that you want to see. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, please give me a thumbs down. And if you'd like to see more educational videos on exercise, nutrition, health, finance, or social issues, please feel free to subscribe as well. If you have any suggestions on what I should do next, comment down below. As always, this has been Ronald, here to learn, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay learning, my friends.